Maasai warriors walk an average of 12 miles per day across uneven East African terrain. They do this into their 70s and 80s, without orthotics, without glucosamine, without a single dedicated stretching session. And the joint degeneration that sidelines most Western men by their late 40s, the grinding knees, the locked hips, the shoulders that can't reach overhead without clicking, simply does not appear in the clinical literature on Maasai aging the way it appears everywhere else. Modern orthopedics has no clean answer for why. Your gym has a foam roller, a mobility class, 2 shelves of joint supplements, and a certified trainer who will remind you to stretch after every session. The Maasai have none of that, and their joints outlast yours by decades. So what did they understand about the human body that 3 gym memberships and a supplement cabinet have not managed to teach you? There are 3 separate answers to that question. They come from 3 different angles. And when you see all 3 together, the picture they form will change what you think joint health actually is. The modern joint failure. What is actually happening? Before the 3 answers, you need to understand the specific failure the Maasai are not experiencing. Joint degeneration in men over 40 is not primarily a wear and tear problem. That is the explanation you were given, and it is incomplete in a way that matters. The wear and tear model implies that joints break down from use, that the more you move, the faster you deteriorate. If that were true, the Maasai, who move more than almost any population on Earth, should be walking on destroyed knees by 60. They are not. What the research actually shows, and what sports medicine has been slowly revising toward for the last 2 decades, is that joint degeneration is a loading pattern problem. It is not how much you load a joint. It is whether you load it evenly, fully, and in the range it was designed to work in. Cartilage does not receive blood supply the way muscle does. It feeds through compression and decompression, through movement that pushes fluid in and pulls fluid back. A joint that is loaded in only one plane, at only one angle, at only one portion of its range, slowly starves the tissue at the edges. Not from overuse, from underuse inside a narrow band of use. That is what most Western training produces. Heavy loading in a limited range. The squat rack hits 90 degrees of knee flexion and stops. The treadmill keeps the hip in a short forward-backward arc. The shoulder press loads elevation but skips rotation. Year after year, the same compressed pattern. The center of the joint fed, the periphery left to dry out. The Maasai never do this. And the reason they never do it is not discipline or stretching or supplementation. It is the structure of their daily life, which happens to load every joint, in every plane, through its complete range, every single day, without ever calling it exercise. 3 mechanisms explain why. 1 is about the ground. 1 is about the load. 1 is about what they never stop doing. Angle 1, the ground beneath them. The Maasai walk on a surface that does not exist in most of the modern world. Irregular, unpredictable, alive terrain. Volcanic rock scattered across red soil, dried riverbeds, grass that hides uneven ground, slopes that shift mid-stride. The terrain of the Rift Valley in Kenya and Tanzania, the Maasai homeland, inhabited continuously for at least 4 centuries, is never flat, never uniform, never the same twice in the same mile. This matters at the level of joint mechanics in a way that is precise and measurable. When you walk on a flat surface, a gym floor, a sidewalk, a treadmill belt, your ankle, knee, and hip solve the same problem the same way, stride after stride. The stabilizing muscles find a fixed solution and repeat it. They do not need to adapt because the surface does not change. Over time, those muscles become efficient at one pattern and weak at every adjacent pattern. The connective tissue around the joint, the ligaments, the tendons, the meniscus at the knee, is never asked to handle a load that arrives from an unexpected angle. Then one day it does. A step off a curb, a foot that lands wrong on a trail. And the tissue that was never asked to stabilize outside the familiar arc fails. Not because it was overworked, because it was never worked in that direction. Maasai terrain never allows a fixed solution. Every step requires the ankle to micro-adjust, the knee to absorb a slightly different load angle, the hip to stabilize in a plane that wasn't predicted. The stabilizing muscles stay active and adaptive throughout decades of walking. The connective tissue is loaded through a constantly shifting range of angles, which is exactly the stimulus that maintains tissue density and joint fluid circulation in the periphery. Orthopedic researchers studying barefoot and minimal footwear populations have a name for what Maasai terrain produces passively: proprioceptive loading variety. It is the thing physical therapists now prescribe deliberately: unstable surfaces, balance boards, sand walking, to rehabilitate injured joints. The Maasai have been doing it continuously, as ordinary transportation, since childhood. The first answer is the ground. Not exercise, just the ground. Angle 2, the load they carry. The Maasai are a pastoralist culture. The men herd cattle across long distances. The women carry water, firewood, and supplies. Both carry loads on their bodies, not in their hands, not on wheeled transport, but balanced directly on the body, primarily on the head and across the shoulders. This is a specific loading pattern with specific consequences for joint health, and it is the opposite of what most modern carrying looks like. When you carry a bag by a handle, a gym bag, a grocery bag, a briefcase, the load hangs from one side of your body. It creates a lateral shear force through the spine. The hip on the loaded side drops or compensates. The shoulder elevates. Over time, asymmetric carrying trains the body into asymmetric loading patterns that transfer directly to asymmetric joint compression. One knee takes more. One side of the lumbar disc compresses more. The pattern accumulates. Head loading, the traditional Maasai carry, produces a completely different mechanical effect. The load sits at the top of the spine's vertical axis, which means the force travels straight down through the skeletal structure rather than pulling laterally. The deep stabilizers of the cervical spine, thoracic spine, and lumbar spine must activate together to maintain that column. The pelvis levels. Both hips share the load symmetrically. Both knees receive equal downward force. Research on African women who carry loads on their heads, documented by University of Natal biomechanists in the 1990s, showed that experienced head loaders carry up to 20% of their body weight with no measurable increase in metabolic cost. Their skeletal alignment under load is more efficient than the unloaded walking of untrained adults. The spine compresses evenly. The hips stay level. The knees track straight. The consequence for joint longevity is direct. Symmetric loading means symmetric cartilage wear. No single facet of any joint is taking a disproportionate share of the compression year after year. The joint ages evenly rather than developing the specific hotspot degeneration that leads to bone-on-bone contact. The second answer is how they carry things. Not stretching, not joint supplements. The mechanical act of carrying loads in a way that distributes force symmetrically through the skeletal stack. Angle 3. What they never stop doing. This is the mechanism most people miss, and it is the one with the most direct application to what happens to men over 40 in modern life. The Maasai never have a sedentary baseline. They do not sit in a chair for 8 hours. They do not alternate between a desk and a gym session. They do not have a version of life that looks like stationary from 9 to 5, then 1 hour of exercise, then stationary again until sleep. The modern pattern: prolonged static loading followed by acute high-intensity loading, followed by prolonged static loading, is, from a joint health perspective, one of the most destructive patterns a body can follow. And it is the default pattern for most men over 40 in the developed world. Here is what happens inside the joint during prolonged sitting. The cartilage, which feeds through compression and decompression, is held in one position under low, constant compression. Synovial fluid, the joint's lubricant and nutrient delivery system, stops circulating. The tissue at the edges of the joint, which needs movement-driven fluid circulation to stay hydrated and dense, begins to dry. Then you stand up, load the joint aggressively, and ask already compromised tissue to absorb impact and load transfer under exercise conditions. The cycle repeats 5 days a week for 20 years. The Maasai body never enters the static compression phase. Movement is continuous, low intensity, and interrupted only by sleep. The joints never get stuck in a single loading position long enough to stop fluid circulation. Synovial fluid keeps moving. Cartilage at every angle of every joint stays hydrated. There is no acute loading phase because there is no baseline stasis to recover from. This is not about fitness. It is not about strength or cardiovascular capacity. It is about what happens to joint tissue when movement is the baseline rather than the exception. The clinical term for what the Maasai lifestyle produces passively is continuous, low-load joint cycling. Physical therapists prescribe short versions of it: gentle movement breaks, low-load rotation, mobilization sets, to patients with early osteoarthritis. It works. The Maasai have been doing the full version since before modern medicine had a name for it. The third answer is not what they do for their joints. It is that they never stop moving. What this means for your joints. You are not going to herd cattle across the Rift Valley. But the three mechanisms are translatable, and the translation is more specific than move more and stand up sometimes. Here is how to replicate each mechanism in a modern context. Replicating the terrain. Proprioceptive loading variety. 3 times per week, introduce a surface that requires your ankle and knee to solve an unpredictable problem. This does not require equipment. A grass field works. A gravel path works. Walking on sand for 20 minutes produces the same proprioceptive stimulus that Maasai terrain generates. If none of those are accessible, a single leg balance exercise on a folded towel, 1 inch of instability, activates the same stabilizing demand. The specific prescription: 15 to 20 minutes of walking on irregular terrain, 3 times per week. If terrain is unavailable, 3 sets of 45-second single-leg balance holds on an unstable surface, performed after your primary training session. The goal is not balance practice in the gym. The goal is accumulated hours of ankle and knee stabilization outside a fixed plane. Start on your dominant leg. When you can hold 45 seconds without your hip dropping or your knee drifting inward, move to the non-dominant leg. When both are stable, add a slight forward lean, 10 degrees at the ankle, which shifts the loading to the posterior chain and increases the demand on the knee stabilizers. This is what your physical therapist would prescribe after a knee injury. The Maasai never needed the prescription because they never lost the stimulus. Replicating the carry, symmetric axial loading. You are not going to carry water on your head, but the mechanical principle, load traveling vertically through the skeletal axis rather than pulling laterally, is accessible. Farmers carries with equal weight in both hands, not one kettlebell. 2. Same weight, both sides, walked for 30 to 40 meters per set, 3 sets per session, twice per week. The instruction is specific. Keep your shoulders level, pelvis level, and gaze straight ahead. The moment one shoulder elevates or one hip drops, the load has become asymmetric, and the mechanical benefit is gone. Start light. 20% of your body weight total is sufficient to activate the deep spinal stabilizers. Add weight only when you can complete 40 meters with 0 lateral drift. For men over 40 with existing lumbar complaints, a Zercher carry, the load held across the forearms at chest height, places the weight even closer to the body's vertical axis and reduces spinal shear further. Both variations produce the symmetric downward force that Maasai head loading generates. 2 sessions per week. This is not a conditioning exercise. It is joint architecture maintenance. Replicating the continuous baseline, low-load joint cycling. This is the one that requires the most honest reckoning with your actual daily movement pattern. The prescription is not to exercise more. It is to eliminate the static loading phases. Specifically, no uninterrupted sitting longer than 50 minutes. Every 50 minutes, stand up and spend 5 minutes in low-load movement. Not stretching, not a workout. Movement that puts your joints through their range without load. Hip circles, shoulder rolls, slow ankle circles, a short walk. 5 minutes. Then return to whatever you were doing. The biological mechanism is simple. Synovial fluid circulates through movement. 5 minutes of low-load joint cycling every 50 minutes maintains the fluid circulation that prolonged static loading interrupts. Your cartilage stays hydrated at the edges, the tissue that dries out and degenerates. The tissue responsible for the grinding and clicking that develops over a decade of desk work stays nourished. Maasai warriors do not have mobility practice. They have a life that never stops moving. You cannot replicate life. You can replicate the mechanical outcome with one behavioral rule. Nothing stays still for more than 50 minutes. The Maasai do not have a joint health protocol. They have a joint healthy life. The terrain is the physical therapist. The carry is strength training. The daily movement is the maintenance program. None of it was designed. All of it was necessary. Modern fitness took the human body's requirements for joint longevity and replaced them with scheduled alternatives. A stretching class twice a week, a glucosamine tablet each morning, a foam roller after leg day. These are not wrong. They are insufficient. They are 20 minutes of replacement for what the human body was built to receive continuously. The joints that last are not the ones that were treated carefully. They are the ones that were never allowed to stop working. Intensity built the warrior. Precision kept him moving. The Maasai understood both without ever calling either by a name. If your shoulder still clicks and your knees still ache despite everything you've been doing for them, the next video is the one to watch. It covers the specific samurai training practice that rebuilt rotator cuff stability in aging warriors without a single overhead press.